Hey, welcome to the Monday edition, the post-week 11 edition of the College 12 Pack. I'm your host, Patrick Klein. With me, as always, Tyler Natuna of LSU Tigers Wire. And you know, Tyler, when I decided we were going to open up the show, I thought we were going to be talking about, did James Franklin blow his opportunity? We were going to talk about the Jim Harbaugh situation. And then Texas A&M said, let's throw some gasoline on this fire. And they fired a head coach after he wins a game by 41. I think if you were going to fire a guy, you'd do it before he got his team bowl eligible. But hey, I'm not the one having to write that $75 million check.
Yeah, they did it. They had been hinting that they could do it. Like they had, made it pretty clear that they felt comfortable they could mobilize that amount of money in a short period of time to get rid of Jimbo, and they did. His buyout alone is like $76 million, probably gonna be north of $100 million when you consider the buyouts for his assistants and stuff. And then when you add in what they're gonna have to pay the new coach, in a fully guaranteed type contract, you're like, this is gonna be like $150 million transaction all told for Texas A&M, which is insane, but they're doing it. I'm a little surprised they clipped him after a win, especially a win like that against an SEC team. Not really surprised overall that it happened. They're 6-4. And they still got to play LSU in Baton Rouge. So, probably looking at 7-5. And I just don't think that's that's not good enough for what they did last year and where they needed to be with the talent on the roster this season. That just wasn't good enough. Jimbo sort of looked like it was going well. In 2020, they went 9-1, after winning 9 games in 8 games first 2 years. And then since then, it just really has not been it. So, kind of a surprising way that whole deal has played out. I think we all felt like it was a pretty slam dunk hire at the time, but now they're paying a lot of money to make him go away.
My big question here, why not fire him after 3 straight losses? Why wait a week? Did they have to wait for a certain check? And I don't know if you saw this. I saw this being passed around on social media, specifically on X, that the 12th Man Foundation wrote a check and were giving it to Ross Bjork at halftime of this game, and it was north of $100 million, which I thought was absolutely insane. It was just almost like, hey, here's the check that we're going to give you. Now go fire that head coach. Yeah, we know he's winning, and he's going to win this game by 41 points, but go ahead and can the coach next week. I just think the timing of it is weird. If they made this decision a week ago and they were just waiting on some sign-offs, okay, I get it. But as I always say, the perception is reality, and the perception is you won a game, you got bowl eligible, and then you fire the coach. But the big question now, Tyler, that we have to ask is who replaces Jimbo Fisher? Because I think we can both agree that as far as jobs available right now, this is probably the best one. Now it's going to be a little bit tougher because of all the teams that they have to face in the SEC, but they have the facilities, they have the money, obviously, so they're going to be able to do some things. And let's not forget, Jimbo Fisher has had the number 1 signing class just a couple of years ago, which his fall from grace is just ridiculous when you think about it. But when you look at some of the guys who are the best options, you're going to hear the names of a Dan Lanning, Kalen DeBoer, that they're going to be tossed around. Do you think it needs to be a guy with Texas ties, or is it literally just get the best guy you can, period, because this program will recruit itself for you?
I don't think it necessarily needs to be someone with Texas ties, but I do think that there's enough guys with Texas ties that would be a good fit for this job that I think there's a good chance they will do that. Not only is this the best job open at this moment, but barring something really surprising, something we're really not expecting to see, it's going to be the best job in this cycle that opens by a pretty wide margin. And so they're going to go to market from a position of power, and that's kind of part of the other reason I don't really understand the timing of it, doing it, first of all, after a win, but also just, I don't really see the need to be quick to market if you're Texas A&M, because they're going to get their choice. They're going to offer more money than anyone else is able to in this cycle, again, barring, the retirement of Nick Saban or something along those lines. And even then, maybe they could offer more money than Alabama. So, this is going to be a premier job that you could look at But, yeah, so I think looking at I think there are definitely good candidates without Texas ties that they could look at, but also there's definitely plenty that are, as I think we'll get into in a second.
Here's the funny one that I'm gonna throw out there. What about Mike Norvell?
I don't think that's going to happen. If that's the lesson Mike Norvell learns from the Jimbo Fisher story, then that would be something.
Well, you think about it. He's a guy with Texas ties, and obviously he's doing well at Florida State. And I'm not saying that that's the route they should go, but it would be an interesting one. The name that keeps being brought up, Dan Lanning. I see these lists. I've seen these lists several times since Saturday when it first was announced, and I've seen Dan Lanning and Kalen DeBoer both on that list. What about Glenn Schumann, the co-DC at Georgia? Go get your own.
Yeah, I could see it. I kind of don't think that they go with a first-time head coach though, just because of the importance of this hire. So yeah, a couple names that I kind of have an eye on. To me, first of all, you got to talk about Jeff Traylor. A guy who has been sought out for big Texas or area jobs like this in the past. Hasn't taken them, but hasn't been offered a job of this caliber. I think he probably would leave UTSA if offered. I'd also say Mike Elko, former Texas A&M defensive coordinator, doing a really good job at Duke. Things have fallen off a little bit down the stretches. They've gotten banged up, but still a really nice 2-year run he's had there. You could always look at someone along the lines of GJ Kinney or Eric Morris if you want to go with someone a little bit younger, more unproven, but, a higher ceiling. Or you could just, go full send and throw the money at Dion. So, I think there's options here. I think I would really be surprised if they go with someone like Schumann, to be honest, just because I don't think they're going to take the chance with a first-time coach.
Here's an interesting name. I don't know how likely it would be, and it's a guy you're familiar with, Dan Quinn, the defense coordinator for the Cowboys. Would he be interested in going back to the collegiate level as a head coach? I don't know how excited he would be about recruiting wise, but he's a name. A couple other names that I've seen tossed around. Again, these are just spitballing. Jed Fish, or what about Lane Kiffin? I know he's a name that we bring up a bunch with Lane Kiffin, but we talk about the talent that he can bring in. He'll have a ton of talent at A&M. And here's a funny thing, and this is not just about candidates, but I find this funny that the year that Texas is getting ready to go to the SEC, the year before, and they look like a college football playoff candidate. And A&M really hadn't looked like that at all during Jimbo Fisher's time outside of the COVID year. Is that another reason why they're trying to make a move?
Yeah, I think it's just when you recruit at the level that he has, that's what the expectation is. I think I saw something like they're like the only team that in the last decade or something that has landed atop, the best class in the country and didn't win a national title within 4 years or something crazy like that. Not only are they it'd be one thing if they were going 11-1 every year and losing in the semi, if they were doing what Michigan's done the last couple of years, something like that, that would be one thing. But they're not even in that mix. They're going 8-4, 7-5, 5-7 last year. That's not where this program expects to be or where it should be given the state of the roster and the talent and the coaches in the building. There's no reason for it.
Oh, absolutely.
Just real quick on Lane Kiffin. I think Lane would take that job in a heartbeat. I think he's dying to get out of Oxford. I don't think A&M would take Lane. I think there's a lot of concerns with Lane. I think he doesn't necessarily recruit at the kind of level that you need to win at a place like that. He's good at the portal, and that's really helped him at Ole Miss. I don't know about the high school recruiting. And I don't know. They've struggled in big games. There's red flags with Lane Kiffin that I would be concerned about giving him the kind of contract that would come with a job like this.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm with you 100% on that. It's just spitballing. It always seems like Lane Kiffin gets kind of his name brought up with these big job openings. So that's one I wanted to look at. Let's talk about some other coaching quick hits as we head into our third segment of the show. Tyler, Jim Harbaugh is in a fight with the Big Ten. And as far as this whole sign stealing scandal, they pointed to Jim Harbaugh. They suspended him, which is kind of funny because we didn't even talk about this. He got suspended on Friday afternoon as the team was flying to Penn State. And what's so interesting about this whole situation is the reaction of the players, the reaction of the assistant coach, whether he's crying on a post game interview after they beat Penn State, and even the Michigan school president coming out with this statement on Twitter /X, whatever you want to call it. He comes out with a statement on Twitter, and everybody's talking like Jim Harbaugh died. Like the guy got suspended, but here's the other thing: they're talking about all this adversity, and this is probably the thing that pisses me off about this whole thing. It's all self-inflicted. Like you can't scream at the top of your lungs that we're having to overcome all this adversity when you did this to yourself.
Yeah, emotional game for Michigan. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh died again. Really sad. Tough moment for those players. No, but like, yeah, it's silly. Like it's ridiculous. With that being said, like I mean, what the Big Ten did here is pretty unprecedented, and I think they have kind of a spurious leg to stand on here. Like I think Michigan could be have a point in some regard, but it's kind of hard to feel too sympathetic towards them when obviously they are reaping the consequences of their own actions, or at least their program surrogates' own actions. I mean, we'll see what happens here. Like, I mean, obviously Harbaugh suspended for the rest of the regular season. They're filing a injunction to try to block that. So, I mean, like I said, we're just dealing. I can't tell you what I think is going to happen here because I've never seen a judge have to rule on whether a conference's suspension of a head coach for cheating purposes is valid. Like, you tell me how they're going to rule on that one. I have no idea. So maybe he'll be on the field against Maryland on Saturday. We will see. I think they've scheduled to make a decision on Friday about that, but a lot that could happen here, but it's just a very bizarre situation.
So prior to the game on Saturday, they tried to get in front of a judge to get a temporary restraining order issued that would have allowed Harbaugh to coach in the game. He was at the team hotel nearby the stadium. That if that would have been granted, he would have coached the game. What I thought was interesting is the two judges that I saw reports that this was going to go in front of. One is a lecturer at the University of Michigan and an alum, and the other was also an alum. And I thought it was funny that even they didn't rule on it. But I think they didn't really want to get involved in that aspect of it. Whereas now it's going to be injunction and things of that nature. So, we'll see. I will be shocked if Jim Harbaugh is not coaching the game against Ohio State to close out the year. But let's talk about the other side of this. And I do want to make the point that I agree with you. This is unprecedented. And by no means do I think this really hurt Michigan. If anything, it just pissed them off more to have a good game. But on the flip side of that, you have James Franklin, who looks like once again he's going to be tapped out at being the third best team in the Big Ten East. If Ohio State, Michigan make it to the playoff, then he will get a New Year's Six bowl. But perhaps 10-2 is the ceiling for James Franklin.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal, honestly, for Penn State. Like, this was the year. I mean, this was the team that people thought was going to be able to get over that hump, and it's just clearly not there. So some changes here. Offense coordinator Mike Yurcich fired on Sunday. Not really a surprise, considering the way the offense performed in the two most important games this year. Drew Allar, like, I don't know, man. We'll see. He's still relatively young and early in his career. He could figure things out, but it's not there right now. I mean, and maybe the change in OC will help, but what they are doing is not working right now. And it's a shame because they have a really, really good defense. Like, I thought the defense, I mean, it had its issues against Michigan. Like, Michigan definitely tested it in ways that even Ohio State didn't, I think. But, I mean, it did enough to win that game. So, yeah, it does kind of feel like they're running into a bit of a ceiling here. I mean, they won the Big Ten in 2016, haven't since then. And, like I said, they're kind of just heading for a repeat of last season where they lose the most important games and go, maybe 11-2, but that's not really raising the ceiling here at all. And, I mean, maybe things get a little bit better after this year. Like, that's kind of your silver lining, right? Is that you're not going to be in the Big Ten East anymore, and your path to the playoff isn't going to necessarily entail beating Ohio State and Michigan, and a 12-team playoff also changes the calculus there a little bit. But it's not good. Like, I mean, there's a reason he felt enough pressure to make another OC change, which he made a few OC changes over the years at Penn State. Trying another direction here, but I mean, I don't know what to make of this program right now.
Yeah, the firing of Mike Yurcich did not surprise me at all. This is the guy that I covered when he was with Texas. He'd never really struck me as a guy who was going to be a game breaker or game changer for Penn State or even at the time at Texas. And it's looked good at times, but in their two biggest games, the offense looked absolutely lost. And you can argue that he was playing the best two defenses in the country. When you talk about Ohio State and Michigan, if you go and look specifically at their scoring defense, they are the number 1 and 2 defenses in the conference, and really everybody's having trouble against those two teams. But at the same time, they've got to make a move there. But just to me, it feels like maybe this is his ceiling, and it'll be really something to watch in the coming weeks, Tyler, as we look at where do they go from here? What changes do they make? But I think they severely need to upgrade that offense in plenty of ways. It just felt like that offense was just boring, vanilla, easy to play defense against because it felt like they knew what was coming.
Yeah, no, I mean it's you nailed it. That's been the issue in both those games. I just way too predictable of an offense. Not, I mean, and I don't want to like not criticize Drew Aller here because I think that's part of the problem. Like I think they are, I think he is limiting the offense right now with the way he's playing. So I mean, lots of issues to figure out there. But you're waiting until it's a little too late to try to figure them out. So I mean, they should win out, but not where this team wanted or expected to be this season.
What I thought was interesting, and this is the last point I'm going to make on this game, I thought it was interesting that J.J. McCarthy threw 8 passes in this game. 8. And not a single one in the second half. That just blows my mind that they didn't have to throw a single pass and could win a football game because eventually what Michigan has done for the last 3 years, it seems like eventually they wear you down, and that's when they punch you in the mouth. Unfortunately, they couldn't wear TCU down last year, but as we've seen time and time again, they wear you down. And eventually, once the floodgate opens, there's no stopping it. All right, so let's talk about hot seat. We've talked a little bit about, the James Franklin and Mike Yurcich situation. We've talked about Jimbo, which was the huge one. How about the other guy that was in there, which I thought was, like, if you would have told me that a coach that was involved in a 41-point game got fired, I would have thought the losing coach, not the winning coach. Well, on Sunday, or actually I think it was on Monday morning, we find out that Zach Arnett is now gone, which not a shock to anybody. But if we're looking at the next coaches that's going to be on that list, I think there's a name or two out in the SEC that we're going to have to keep an eye on.
Who are you thinking there? Now you got me curious.
Sam Pittman? I mean, isn't this?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. I misunderstood what you were saying. I actually don't know about that. If that's a foregone conclusion about Sam Pittman, like he could be. I think they like him there. I think they're looking for a reason to keep him. But yeah, the Auburn loss really killed whatever momentum they got from beating Florida. So yeah. Zach Arnett, man, that was tough. Like, I get it. It was a rough year, and I don't think that really ever had a ton of like steam behind it. But he stepped into a really hard situation, like as hard as anyone ever will. I'm a little surprised they didn't give him more than 1 year to figure it out. He made wholesale changes in terms of scheme. They weren't running the air raid anymore. It really was not working. So I get it. Like, I think it's tough to not give him that kind of time, but this was a really rough season for them.
Yes, it was. I agree with you 100%. Well, let's look at names that maybe you do agree with me on. Jake Dykert. Do you agree with me on Washington State?
Yeah, I have him on my list. They lost to Cal. They are 4-6, and they're not going to a bowl game unless they beat Washington. I can't remember who else they play, but someone who's probably better than them. Um, so yeah, it's a tough situation. I think Dykert really had a lot of momentum earlier in the year. Now, I mean, the thing that's kind of his saving grace is the uncertainty with their program. Like, I really don't know if you fire a coach at this point if you're them, just because you don't even know who in what league you're going to be playing next year. So, like, a lot of questions to figure out in addition to head coach. So,
Washington State has to play Colorado on Friday night. That's going to be an interesting one. So as far as coaches out west, definitely him.
Can we real quick, just before we move on, just staying out west with the Mountain West real quick, couple G5 updates. Boise State fires Andy Avalos. They've had a couple down years, really had not been able to keep up the pace in the Mountain West under Brian Harsin. And also Brady Hoke retiring at San Diego State. Maybe a little bit of a retirement under duress there. They've had a rough season. But just wanted to get those two out there real quick. Those are the only other two I've seen today.
Is it retired or forced to retire?
Yeah, I think I lean a little bit more towards the latter, but I don't know that, so I don't want to speculate too much.
Well, right. It but your opinion, and like my opinion is like when I heard retire, that was the first thing I thought of was, are they saying, look, either you retire or we fire you, go out your way rather than our way? I don't know, but good point. Hey, so when it comes to, and I know this, we're not doing it in this segment. This is more of the hot seat update. But perhaps Brian Harsin 2.0 in Boise. Don't know. Maybe they go Kellen Moore, who's another, former Boise State player turned coach. The only reason I bring those up is I think they probably go offense next time around. But let's go to the Big 12, where I have Dana Holgorsen, and I also will say Dave Aranda. Just a fall from grace for Dave Aranda. 2 years ago, he won a Big 12 championship. He won a Sugar Bowl as the Big 12 champion, going to a New Year's Six Bowl. He won that game. Man, but since then, 9-14 since that time. This year, they've lost 5 games by 10 or more points. They've lost 3 games by 25 or more points. Dave Aranda looks like a head coach that is absolutely lost. And I don't know that they'll fire him because we don't know the buyout information because Baylor's private school and they don't disclose that information. But when I look at Baylor, they look like the team prior to Art Briles' arrival, just lost, don't have an identity, and they can't stop anybody and they can't score.
Yeah, Dana, I thought was maybe doing enough to stick around, in the middle of the season. They lost to Cincinnati, I believe, at home on Saturday, which is not good. That's tough. That probably is going to do it. I think they're going to give him till the end of the year, but that's probably going to do it. And then, sorry, who was the other one you had that we're talking? Sorry.
Dave Aranda.
Dave Aranda. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Dave Aranda, they are horrible this year. There's no way around it. They are like shockingly bad. They got absolutely boat raced by Kansas State on Saturday, have the Texas State loss. They've just, in general, been really not a good team this year. I think, like I said, like you said, we don't know Dave Aranda's buyout because they're a private school, but we can estimate based on the fact that he signed a very lengthy extension after the 2021 season. I think we can estimate that buyout's going to be pretty high. And I feel like that's probably going to save him, but I think he will definitely be a guy going into 2024 under a considerable deal of pressure.
Yeah, no, I think when you look at, if he survives this year and he goes into next year, along with probably Billy Napier at Florida, they're probably going to be 2 guys that I'm going to be paying attention to next year, just because of the expectations and what we've actually seen on the field. But as of right now, yeah, Dana's probably got the hottest seat in the Big 12. If you look around, and right behind him, yeah, I have Aranda. And then when I look at the Big 10 right now, I don't really feel like there's a lot in the ACC that we might see change unless they do finally pull the trigger on Dino Babers up there at Syracuse. But looking in the ACC, I think Tom Allen's the next guy. Now, I know he's played a couple close games against Penn State and Indiana, obviously losing to Indiana in overtime. But ever since that 2020 season, it's just been really bad for the Hoosiers and their head coach.
Yeah, I think Tom Allen, like there was a time where he looked like he was like going to do something at Indiana that no one really had in recent memory. I think that ship is entirely sailed at this point. I don't really know what he's got, what he brings to the table anymore there. But going back to the buyout situation, it's like 25 million. It's something insane, the buyout there. And they have money, but not as much money as other teams in the Big Ten do. I really don't think they're going to pay that buyout. Like from everything I've heard, it doesn't sound like they're going to do that. I think we might be running it back here with Tom Allen, but it wouldn't shock me if they paid it. I'll talk about him real quick if that's cool since you brought him up. Billy Napier, obviously not going to get fired this year. I think he could go into, so I think the amount of pressure Billy could face in 2024 could still vary a lot depending on what happens in these coming weeks. I think if they find a way to win one of these last two against Missouri and Florida State, get to a bowl game, keep this recruiting class mostly together. They had a couple decommits over the weekend, which is a little concerning, but still got the bones of the class in place. If you get to a bowl game and keep the class together, I don't think the pressure is going to be absurd going into 2024. You miss a bowl game and or see more recruiting decommitments, like he will be under a ton of pressure in 2024.
Yeah, I'm definitely not on the train of saying that he's probably coaching his last year in Gainesville. I don't think that at all. But I think the combination of losing commits and not playing for a bowl game, and let's be honest, Florida has 2 tough games left. I felt like the LSU game might have been their best chance to win and get that 6 win and get to a bowl, but knowing that they have to play Missouri, who's red hot right now, and Florida State, who nobody's been able to beat them this year. That's a tough one. But yeah, going into next year will be something we definitely want to take a look at. All right, but let's talk about the games that actually played. We've done a lot of talk today about the coaches, right? Let's talk about some of the games that transpired over the weekend. Obviously, we talked about Michigan. We talked about the Penn State. Was there any game that really stood out to you as far as the title picture as it pertains to 2023?
The national title picture, I'd say, you could look at the games in the Pac-12. I think it's pretty obvious now that Washington and Oregon are the 2 best teams. Like, this is what it's going to be. We're going to see a rematch of that. And the winner's probably going to the playoffs. So, that was the biggest takeaway, I would say there. Otherwise, I think it's pretty clear. We'll see. Maybe Louisville can push FSU in the ACC. I think their path to going undefeated and making the playoffs is very, very easy. Pretty much right now, you got to go beat Florida in the Swamp, which, they play better at home than they do on the road, but still going to be heavy favorite in that game. And then, a Louisville team that we'll see. They haven't really been tested yet. So we'll see.
We had a Washington team who survived Utah. That game was close. We saw one of the biggest boneheaded plays of the year with the dropping the ball before you crossing the.
He dropped it at like the 5, man. That's like the earliest I've ever seen someone drop it.
It seems to be more and more common occurrence ever since I saw Deshaun Jackson do it as a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. It feels like it's constantly happening, and I understand they want to celebrate, but at the same time, a couple other games I thought, not close. Georgia over Ole Miss, just absolute beat down, and then obviously Alabama beat down Kentucky. Jalen Milroe looks like a very dangerous weapon right now. Those 2 teams are going to be going to the SEC championship. So for the second time in 3 years, we'll see that matchup. Last time Alabama won and then ultimately lost to Georgia in the national championship game. So that'll be very interesting. Alabama wins the SEC. I don't know that you can keep them out of the college football playoff. It'd be a really tough decision there. Yeah. LSU, Florida, we talked about a little bit. My God, Jaden Daniels, just the show that he put on in that game. Throwing for over 350 yards, rushing for over 200 yards. That 85-yard touchdown, like that he ran, I was just amazed at how he looked. And again, tap the brakes a little bit. It was a Florida defense that's struggling. But if you talk about a player who made a Heisman statement on Saturday, it was Jaden Daniels.
Yeah, I mean, look, Florida's defense is struggling. There's no doubt about it. But that does not explain Jaden Daniels single-handedly accounting for 606 yards or something like that. I mean, he's the first player in FBS history ever, in college football history, to go 300 to throw for 350 yards, run for 200. That's absolutely unreal. He actually ran for 250 too. Like, he was almost at 400 passing and ran for 250, more than 250. So I mean, absolutely unreal performance. I mean, if that didn't win the Heisman for him, like, I don't know what will. I mean, it's a joke to me, honestly, if he doesn't win the Heisman at this point. Like, the way he plays, like, I understand LSU's got struggles as a team. Their defense is bad, and that's why they're going to lose probably 3 games, 4 games. But I mean, there's no one that can do what Jaden Daniels is doing right now. He's the most electric player in the country. It's not even close. Absolutely unreal. And I mean, if I were an LSU fan, just a bummer that they haven't been able to put even a top 75 defense around him, because that probably is good enough to be a playoff contender. But instead, they've got one of the worst defenses in the entire country, as you saw by the fact that Florida still went for like 500 yards in this game. I mean, Graham Mertz was good. They ran the ball. I mean, this was a shootout, and it was closer than it should have been, given the fact that Jaden Daniels did something nobody has in 150 years of college football.
That just tells you how bad the LSU defense is, run by Matt House, and why he was on my coaching hot seat list. I kind of had to throw another coordinator on there. But you're right. Just watching the game, what Jane Daniels did, 372 yards, 234 rushing. Brian Thomas Jr. had a fantastic game. I'll tell you the game that little surprised me a little bit, because if you looked at the betting lines, this was a pick game, like basically pick the winner, a pick 'em game, and Missouri absolutely boat raced Tennessee. Like, this game wasn't even close, and that shocked me about as much as watching UCF just absolutely destroy Oklahoma State on Saturday. Those are the 2 games that really stood out to me in terms of how good Missouri is, and just where I thought we were going to see the Big 12 title picture. I thought we were on our way to seeing Texas, Oklahoma State. Now I'm not so sure. We'll get into the title picture here in a minute, but just have to give props to Brady Cook in Missouri and that job that Coach Drink is doing there in Columbia.
Yeah, Missouri's legit, man. I mean, like, Drinkwitz, I don't think there's a coach in the country that's changed their perception more in a positive way than Drinkwitz has this season. I mean, between the way he's recruiting and the way they're playing right now, I mean, like, this all of a sudden looks like a team that's really well poised to be successful in the new SEC, which is insane. I don't think anyone saw that coming into the year. They obviously beat down Tennessee. Offensively, Tennessee's got problems. This is, I think, the first game we've really seen the drop back, or the step back, I should say, on offense this season hurt them. And it came against, a pretty solid Missouri defense, which is why I don't love Florida's chances going on the road there next week. But Missouri's a really good team. The Oklahoma State game, man, I just don't know what to say. That's just a result that I would have never guessed would have happened. And what's wild is we'll get into in a second, it might not really impact their chances in the Big 12 that significantly. So kind of insane, but we'll see. I mean, we talked about it. You talked about it a little earlier. Like, I mean, I think it's pretty clear Alabama and Georgia are hitting their stride. I think, we've had a lot of fun this season in college football, but we might just be heading towards one of those 2 teams going Death Star mode and ending it.
Yeah, and let's talk about the Big 12 title picture as we wrap up this edition of the College 12 Pack. It's a convoluted picture. It's crowded. I think when you look at it, there's only one team that absolutely controls their destiny. It's the Texas Longhorns. They win out, they're in. Nobody can stop them, because at that point they'll be 11-1 and 8-1 in the Big 12. So that's all they've got to do. They play Iowa State in Ames. They play Texas Tech in Austin to close out the year. Now, the teams behind them, let's talk about Oklahoma State. They controlled their destiny coming into this game, but the loss to UCF kind of opened it back up. So their path to the title is Texas has to win out, and they need Kansas State to beat Iowa State, because Kansas State, Iowa State has the tiebreaker over Oklahoma State. So that's what they need to get in. Not as complicated as what I thought it might be, considering the loss to UCF this weekend.
Well, so, I mean, yeah, I think Oklahoma State. So we're kind of workshopping through this in real time, so bear with us. But I think Oklahoma State, so they're 5-2. There's a 4-way tie for 5-2, right, in the Big 12.
Right.
Am I correct in that? I think. Yeah. So Oklahoma State finishes the year out with, I believe, Cincinnati and BYU. I want to say it's two of the newcomers. I want to say it's Cincinnati and BYU. Regardless, it's 2 games they should win. Kansas State finishes out with. They've got one tough game, but they're also not in the driver's seat because they lost to Oklahoma State. But Iowa State finishes up with Texas and Kansas State. So Iowa State technically could control their own destiny here, but they have by far the toughest path to finish out. And all Oklahoma State needs is for Iowa State to lose, I think, one of these last 2. And then obviously they have to win out. But they would then get in because they would have 2 losses. Iowa State would have 3, and they would have the tiebreaker over Kansas State, even if they won out.
Right, but they need Iowa State to lose to Kansas State, because if they lose to Texas, that adds another team. Or if they beat Texas, that adds another team to the tiebreaker.
Yeah,
so then it really messes things up. And really, if you're an Oklahoma fan, you're rooting for Texas to lose to Iowa State. Because if you look at the Cyclones, like you said, they might have the easiest path to the title for any team that's not Texas, right? They need to win out and have the Sooners lose a game, and they're basically in. Oklahoma has to play BYU and TCU, so not exactly a tough stretch down there. They've got to win both games, have Texas win out, and then Oklahoma State needs to lose a game because of the tiebreaker that Oklahoma State holds over Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think Oklahoma's odds are pretty slim here. I really don't think Oklahoma State loses another game. I think that they're going to be in position at 10-2. I think they're just going to have to sit and see what happens with Iowa State and Texas and Kansas State and how those games all play out. But I think that, I want to say it's Cincinnati and Houston that they play to finish out the year. So they should be okay. Maybe it's BYU and Cincinnati, but BYU and Cincinnati. So yeah. So they should be okay in both those games. Like I'm not too worried about it. So yeah.
And then we have Kansas State, who have to beat Kansas and Iowa State, and they need Texas to lose once. That's how they get in. But of course, if Texas loses, I believe, based on the tiebreakers, Texas might be out. And it might end up being K-State and Oklahoma. If it fell the way that it needs to fall. There's a lot that's got to happen. So I think the easiest path that we'll talk here is Iowa State winning out or Texas winning out. Now, I'm more apt to believe Texas will win out versus Iowa State, especially now that Quinn Ewers is back for Texas. And I think this is interesting, and I'm just going to pass this along. I saw Orange Bloods, which is part of Rivals, is reporting that Quinn Ewers is likely going to be back next year. I guess because of the injury concerns and not having, missing some games for NFL draft purposes. I don't know that this will actually happen, but that'd be quite a story considering most people thought next year would be the year that we finally get to see Arch Manning.
Yeah, that's wild. I hadn't heard that. So that's news to me, finding out right now that that's been reported. So that'd be certainly a big boost for them going into their first year in the SEC. We'll see how that ultimately plays out. But yeah, I mean, Texas, they got Quinn Ewers back on Saturday and were a little shaky against TCU. I admittedly wasn't watching that game super attentively because I was kind of more focused on, LSU, Florida, and Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss. But I think, Texas has still been a little shaky. I think we'll see. Maybe Quinn Ewers is still kind of getting back from a shoulder injury. Like, that's understandable. We'll see how they look down the stretch. And, Iowa State's going to be a tough game. Like, they're a solid team, definitely better than we expected them to be with, losing your starting quarterback to the gambling stuff and all that before the season.
Yeah, that game against Iowa State is going to be interesting and tricky at the same time because one of the bad things that came out of that TCU win was the loss of Jonathan Brooks. He tore his ACL.
Yeah.
So obviously he's not going to play this year and probably not going to play first half, maybe the first 3 quarters of next year, depending on how the recovery goes. But let's not forget, Texas has some running backs. They have Jaden Blue, Keelan Robinson, CJ Baxter, the 5-star running back they signed last year. So they've got the guys behind them, but Jonathan Brooks was a big part of that offense, so some guys are going to have to pick it up. But, overall, I think you have to like what they got going on there in Austin, and we'll see how this all plays out. It's coming down to it's coming down to the wire in most of these conferences, and we'll continue to monitor that each and every week. But that'll do it for this edition of the College 12-Pack. Myself and Tyler will be back on Wednesday. Get you ready for a I don't know. Would you call this a cupcake week, Tyler? It's kind of looking like a cupcake.
It's not the best weekend of football we've ever seen. It's not the best weekend.
But that's just going to make it more fun as we get ready for Thanksgiving weekend and the games that are going to be going down. It is going to be an interesting and one that we are all going to want to watch. And then we get the championship games early December, and then who doesn't love Army Navy that second week in December? The game that everybody's going to want to watch. But for Tyler, I'm Patrick. We'll see you on Wednesday.